Daniel's leather jacket hit the alley wall with a sickening thud. Two men, faces twisted with rage, circled the Hell's Angels member like wolves cornering prey. Blood dripped from his split lip as a boot connected with his ribs. "You should have paid when you had the chance," one snarled, raising a crowbar overhead. Daniel's hand fumbled for his knife, but it was too late. Then, a sharp crack echoed through the darkness. The attacker froze mid-swing, confusion flooding his face. 10-year-old Olivia stood at the alley's entrance, another baseball gripped tight in her trembling hand. "Run," she whispered to Daniel. But the men turned toward her instead. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Daniel's skull cracked against the brick wall with a sound that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. The impact sent shockwaves through his teeth, rattled his brain inside his skull like dice in a cup, and for a moment the world became nothing but white noise and the taste of copper flooding his mouth. His vision blurred. Seattle's Pike Place Market alley spinning into fragments of graffiti, dumpster rust, puddles reflecting neon signs from the street beyond, and the two men who'd been waiting for him in the dark like spiders in a web. The crowbar came down again, metal meeting ribcage with a wet crunch that Daniel felt more than heard, and suddenly breathing became a luxury his body couldn't afford. He'd survived 15 years with the Hells Angels. He'd survived knife fights in Nevada where the desert sand had turned red under moonlight, shootouts in Arizona that left bullet scars across his shoulder blade, a rival club's ambush in Portland that killed 3 men and should have killed him too. But tonight, behind the custom motorcycle shop where he rebuilt engines and tried to forget the vote that had apparently signed his death warrant 3 months ago, Daniel Cruz was running out of miracles and time and reasons to believe he'd see tomorrow. The bigger attacker, 6'4" of pure violence, neck tattoos spelling out something in Spanish that Daniel's fading consciousness couldn't translate, grabbed his leather jacket with hands like steel vices and slammed him into the wall again. Daniel's head bounced off brick, and somewhere distant he heard his own groan, pathetic and weak, the sound of prey realizing the hunt was over. "You think voting no makes you noble?" the man snarled, breath reeking of cigarettes and cheap whiskey and rage that had been fermenting for months. Spit flew from his lips, landing on Daniel's cheek like acid. "You think the cartel forgets? You think they don't know exactly who killed their partnership?" Daniel tried to speak, tried to explain that his vote against the drug partnership had been about principle, about keeping poison out of Seattle streets, about the 100 kids who would have overdosed on fentanyl-laced product within a month if that shipment had gone through. He'd seen the lab reports his prospect had pulled using that new AI detection software, seen the purity levels that screamed death sentence, and he'd voted his conscience instead of his survival instinct. Apparently, that had been a mistake, but his jaw wasn't working right anymore. Something was broken in there, grinding against itself, and blood dripped from his split lip onto the patch over his heart. The Hells Angels insignia he'd earned through loyalty, through blood, through choices that haunted him at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come and the ghosts got loud. The second attacker stepped into the narrow beam of streetlight filtering through the alley entrance, and Daniel's remaining hope shattered like glass hitting pavement. Detective Marcus, Seattle PD, 15 years on the force, decorated twice for bravery. The same cop who'd looked the other way when the Angels needed breathing room, who'd taken envelopes stuffed with cash in exchange for early warnings about raids, who'd smiled at Daniel 3 weeks ago over coffee at that diner on 4th Street, and said, "You're one of the good ones, man. You actually give a damn about this city." Apparently, good wasn't currency anymore. Apparently, principles had an expiration date, and Daniel's had just run out. Marcus held the Louisville Slugger like he'd been practicing in his garage, tapping it against concrete in a rhythm that matched Daniel's failing heartbeat. Thud, 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 like a countdown to nothing. "The books don't lie," Marcus said, voice flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but didn't believe. $500,000. You really thought the cartel wouldn't notice you skimming? You really thought they'd let that slide? Daniel's mind screamed the truth through the fog of pain. He hadn't stolen anything, hadn't touched cartel money, had spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out who was actually bleeding the operation dry, while someone systematically framed him for it. But explanations required breath, and the big man's boot just connected with his stomach, driving air from his lungs in a wheeze that sounded like surrender, like acceptance, like the beginning of the end. 6 blocks away, in a universe that felt separate from violence and death, Olivia Martinez sat on the fire escape of her cramped Seattle apartment, baseball gripped in her 10-year-old hands like it was the last solid thing in a world made of smoke and broken promises. The metal stairs were cold against her jeans, rusted and probably unsafe, but nobody cared enough to fix them, and Olivia had stopped expecting adults to fix anything months ago. Her father had been gone 42 days this time. Some long-haul trucking route through Montana and Idaho that paid triple, but kept him away until Olivia forgot what his voice sounded like, without phone static corrupting it into something mechanical and distant. He called every 3 days, always apologizing, always promising he'd be home soon, always sounding more tired than any human should sound. Her mother had been gone 6 months and 14 days, buried in a cemetery plot they couldn't afford under a headstone that read "Beloved Mother," because her father couldn't manage anything more poetic through his grief and the medical debt that had swallowed their savings like a black hole. Olivia practiced her throwing form in the dark, the motion her mom had taught her during those final good weeks before the hospital visits became permanent, before the word leukemia became a monster that ate everything: time, hope, the sound of her mother's laugh, the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings, the feeling that the world was a safe place where bad things happened to other families. The baseball was signed. Not by anyone famous, just her mother's handwriting in fading Sharpie that Olivia traced with her thumb every night before bed. "Throw like you mean it, baby girl." So Olivia threw. Against the brick wall behind Pike Place Market, where the acoustics made each impact sound bigger, more important, like she was accomplishing something instead of just killing time, until her father remembered she existed, until the loneliness stopped feeling like drowning, until tomorrow became something worth waiting for. The rhythm was meditative: wind up, release, impact, retrieve, repeat. Her mother had been a softball player in high school, good enough for college scouts to notice before an injury ended that dream, and she'd passed down her precision to Olivia with the kind of patience that only mothers possess. "Elbow high," she'd say, adjusting Olivia's form with gentle hands. "Eyes on target. Weight shifts forward. You're not just throwing, you're sending a message." Olivia sent messages into the dark, again and again, pretending each impact was solving something, fixing something, bringing something back. That's when she heard it. The sound that didn't belong in her careful rhythm. Grunts, thuds, something heavy hitting something solid, and underneath it all, a voice begging in a way that made Olivia's stomach turn cold. She froze, baseball mid-grip, every instinct her mother had drilled into her screaming contradictory commands. Go inside, lock the door, call someone, help, run, hide, act. But call who? Her father was 2 states away, probably asleep in some truck stop parking lot. Her neighbors were strangers who complained about noise and never made eye contact in the hallways. And the voice in the alley, it sounded like drowning, like last chances, like the moments before something permanent and unfixable happened, the kind of moment that divided life into before and after. Olivia moved before her brain caught up, slipping through the gap in the chain-link fence that separated her building from the market's back lot, creeping toward the alley entrance with her heart trying to punch through her ribs and her breath coming in short gasps that sounded too loud in the quiet. What she saw turned her blood to ice water. 2 men, massive, professional, wearing expressions like murder was just another Tuesday chore to check off a list, destroying someone in a leather jacket. The victim slumped against the wall, face unrecognizable under blood and swelling, and one of the attackers raised a crowbar overhead for what looked unmistakably like a killing blow. Olivia had never seen real violence before, not like this, not the kind that left bodies broken and lives ended. She'd seen movie violence, video game violence, The sanitized version where heroes got back up and blood was just special effects. This was different. This was final. Then Olivia saw his face under the streetlight's weak glow. Detective Marcus. The cop her father had introduced her to 8 months ago at a community barbecue the police department hosted. The one who'd knelt down to her level with kind eyes and said, "If you ever need help and your dad's not around, you call me, okay? I'll keep you safe." That's what I do. The man who'd given her his direct number written on the back of a business card she still kept in her school backpack's front pocket, laminated so it wouldn't get damaged, just in case. Confusion slammed into fear like a car crash, and Olivia's hands shook so hard the baseball nearly dropped to the pavement. Detective Marcus was hurting someone. Detective Marcus, the safe adult, the backup plan, the person she was supposed to trust when the world got dangerous, was about to kill a man in an alley like it meant nothing, like human life was disposable, like the badge he wore was just decoration hiding something rotten underneath. Olivia's mind raced through impossible explanations. Maybe the man in the leather jacket was a criminal. Maybe this was an arrest gone wrong. Maybe there was context she didn't understand. But arrests didn't look like this. Arrests had handcuffs and rights being read in backup units. This looked like an execution. Olivia didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed her, would have sent her running home to hide under blankets and pretend she hadn't witnessed what good people weren't supposed to see, what 10-year-old girls from broken homes definitely weren't supposed to interrupt. Instead, muscle memory took over, the form her mother had drilled into her thousands of times. She wound up like she was aiming for the strike zone, elbow high, eyes locked on target, weight shifting forward through her hips, and she threw. The baseball cut through the night air with a sound like a breath being released, spinning tight and fast and true, and connected with the crowbar-wielding attacker's temple with a crack that echoed off brick walls like a gunshot. The man dropped like someone had cut his power cord, crowbar clattering to pavement with a metallic ring, body crumpling in a heap that looked wrong, broken, and for 3 suspended seconds that felt like hours, nobody moved. Time stopped. Breathing stopped. The world held its breath. Then Marcus turned. Slowly, deliberately, neck muscles tensing like a predator who'd just sensed new prey. He saw Olivia standing at the alley entrance, skinny and terrified, and holding nothing but empty air where her baseball used to be. And his face did something terrible. Recognition melting into calculation, melting into cold decision. Like he was solving an equation, and she was the variable that needed eliminating. "Kid," he said, voice almost apologetic, almost regretful, the tone you'd used to explain why a pet had to be put down. "You shouldn't have done that." The big man with neck tattoos staggered upright, blood streaming from where the baseball had split skin above his ear, and his eyes locked onto Olivia with the kind of focused predators reserved for prey that can't fight back, that won't be missed, that made a mistake, and now has to pay for it. He started moving toward her. Not running, just walking with awful inevitability, like he had all the time in the world and she had nowhere to go, like the outcome was already decided and the only question was how much she'd suffer first. Olivia's legs finally remembered how to work, firing panic signals that screamed run, but it was too late. Her body had hesitated 1 second too long. He was 10 feet away, then 7. Then 5, the man in the leather jacket. Daniel, though Olivia didn't know his name yet, didn't know anything except that she'd just saved him and doomed herself, tried to shout something, his broken voice scraping out a single word through blood and damaged vocal cords. Run. But Olivia's legs had turned to concrete, her breath coming in short gasps that didn't reach her lungs, making her lightheaded and dizzy, and the attacker was 3 feet away, his massive hand reaching for her throat, fingers spread wide enough to wrap completely around her neck, when the sound hit like physical force. Motorcycle engines. Multiple. Roaring into the alley entrance like mechanized thunder, deep and guttural and impossibly loud. Headlights flooding the scene in harsh white light that turned shadows into monsters and monsters into men and washed out all the safe darkness Olivia had been using to hide. But these weren't police bikes. These weren't rescue vehicles with sirens and safety and adults who'd kneel down and promise everything would be okay, who'd wrap emergency blankets around her shoulders and call her father and make the nightmare stop. These were custom Harleys, low and mean and loud enough to shake Olivia's bones, chrome glinting like weapons under the headlights, and the riders wore leather cuts with patches identical to Daniel's. The same insignia, the same club, the same winged death's head logo that Olivia had seen in news reports about gang violence and drug trafficking. The Hells Angels had arrived, and from the expressions on their faces as they killed the engines and climbed off their bikes, 5 men, then 6, then 7 emerging from the dark like an army mobilizing, Olivia realized something that made her earlier fear feel like practice, like preparation for the real terror that was just beginning. She'd just thrown herself into the middle of a war she didn't understand, saved a man she didn't know, and caught the attention of people who operated outside every rule she'd been taught to follow, people who made their own justice and answered to no authority except their own. The lead rider, older than the others with a gray beard streaked with white and eyes like winter, cold, assessing, missing nothing, looked at Daniel slumped against the wall, blood pooling beneath him. Then at Marcus and the big attacker frozen in the headlights like deer, their confidence evaporating as they calculated odds that no longer favored them. Then at Olivia, still standing there with empty hands and nowhere to run, a 10-year-old girl who'd just altered the trajectory of her entire life with one perfect throw. The lead rider's face revealed nothing, no anger, no surprise, no mercy, just calculation happening behind those winter eyes. He spoke one word, quiet but absolute, carrying the weight of authority that didn't need volume. Explain. 6 Hells Angels surrounded Olivia in the abandoned warehouse, their shadows stretching across oil-stained concrete like prison bars closing in. The space smelled of rust and motor oil and something darker, old violence, the kind that soaked into walls and never left. Olivia's legs had finally stopped shaking, but only because they'd gone numb, her entire body locked in survival mode as she stood in the center of their circle, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her life. Most of their faces remained hidden in shadow, illuminated only by the single bare bulb swinging overhead, casting moving shadows that made everything feel unstable, temporary, like reality could shift at any moment. But the man standing directly in front of her, the one with the gray-streaked beard who demanded an explanation in the alley, stepped into the light, and Olivia saw eyes that had witnessed things no child should ever imagine. He spoke quietly, voice rough like gravel shifting, and asked the question that would determine whether she left this warehouse alive. Why did you save him? Olivia's mouth went dry. How did you explain instinct to people who dealt in calculated violence? How did you tell men who'd probably killed before that you'd acted without thinking, that hearing someone beg for their life had overridden every self-preservation instinct her mother had taught her? He was dying, Olivia whispered, voice cracking on the words. They were going to kill him. The gray-bearded man. The others called him Reaper, a name that fit too perfectly, tilted his head slightly, studying her like she was a puzzle missing pieces. People die every day, kid. That's how the world works. Why'd you make it your problem? Behind Reaper, Daniel sat slumped against the warehouse wall, being tended by a younger angel with medical supplies spread across a workbench. Daniel's face looked worse under the harsh lighting. Left eye swollen completely shut, cheekbone misshapen, blood still seeping through butterfly bandages someone had applied. He'd barely been conscious during the ride here, kept upright between 2 angels on their bikes, and Olivia had followed in a van driven by a silent man with scars across his knuckles that spelled out a word she couldn't read. I don't know, Olivia admitted, because lying to people who could smell deception seemed stupider than anything she'd done tonight. I just knew if I didn't do something, he'd die, and I'd have watched it happen. I'd have been part of it. Reaper's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those winter eyes, recognition, maybe, or memory of a time when he'd made similar choices for similar reasons. You know what you interrupted back there? He asked. You know what kind of people were hurting Daniel? Olivia nodded slowly. One of them was Detective Marcus. My dad introduced us. Said if I ever needed help. Her voice broke, the betrayal hitting fresh now that adrenaline was fading. Everything she believed about safe adults and good cops, and people who protected instead of destroyed had shattered in that alley. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from. You never know when your safe person becomes the threat. Reaper's jaw tightened. Marcus, he repeated, and the name came out like poison. He turned to the other angels. Detective Marcus, Seattle PD, the one feeding intel too. He stopped himself, glancing at Olivia, calculating what a 10-year-old should hear. But Daniel spoke up from across the warehouse, his voice a ruined rasp that barely carried. Cartel payroll. 2 years. We had suspicions, but no proof. He coughed, and one of the angels handed him water that he sipped carefully, wincing. The bastard's been playing both sides. Taking our money, taking their money, probably laughing all the way to his offshore accounts. Reaper cursed under his breath. The other one with him? Big guy, neck tattoos. Daniel nodded, then immediately regretted the movement. Carlos, cartel enforcer. Marcus must have called him in for the job. They waited for me behind the shop, knew my schedule, knew I'd be alone. His one good, I found Olivia across the warehouse. Kid saved my life. That throw. He almost smiled, but his split lip wouldn't allow it. I've seen grown men with worse aim. The angels exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that Olivia couldn't decipher. Finally, one of them, younger, with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his eyebrow, spoke up. What do we do with her? She's a witness. She saw Marcus. She saw Carlos. She knows where we brought Daniel. The implication hung heavy in the air, and Olivia's brief moment of hope evaporated like steam. She was a liability now, a loose end, a problem that needed solving. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into palms, preparing for fight or flight, even though both options were impossible. But Daniel pushed himself more upright, ignoring the angel trying to keep him still. She stays under our protection, he said, voice gaining strength despite the damage. Until we handle Marcus and Carlos. They saw her face. They know she interfered. You think they're just gonna let that slide? Reaper turned back to Olivia, expression unreadable. Where's your family? Parents? Someone who'll notice you're gone. The question open wounds Olivia had been trying to keep closed. My mom died 6 months ago. Leukemia. The word still tasted like ashes. My dad drives trucks. Long haul. He's been gone 42 days. Won't be back for another week, maybe 2. Depends on the route. She tried to sound matter of fact, like being essentially orphaned was normal, like loneliness was just another condition she'd learned to live with. So nobody's waiting for you right now? Reaper pressed. Nobody's gonna call the cops if you don't come home tonight. Olivia shook her head. I'm supposed to check in with Mrs. Chin downstairs every day, but she mostly just takes the $20 my dad leaves and ignores me. I could be gone 3 days before anyone noticed. The admission felt pathetic, exposing exactly how disposable she'd become, but it was true. Her father's absence had transformed her into a ghost haunting her own life, visible but not really seen. Reaper was quiet for a long moment, weighing options that probably included outcomes Olivia didn't want to imagine. Then he nodded once, decisively. You stay here tonight. Tomorrow we figure out a longer-term solution. But first, he pulled out his phone, swiped through screens with calloused fingers that seemed too rough for touchscreen precision. I need to know something. What's your father's full name, and what company does he drive for? The question seemed innocent enough, routine even, but something in Reaper's tone made Olivia's instincts scream warning. Still, what choice did she have? His name's Garrett, she said. He drives for transcontinental freight. The red trucks with the white stripe. Why? Every angel in the room went completely still. The kind of stillness that preceded explosions, violence, revelations that couldn't be taken back. Reaper's eyes widened fractionally, the first real emotion Olivia had seen break through his iron control. He typed something into his phone, scrolled, then turned the screen toward her. Is this your dad? The photo showed a man who looked like her father, but wrong. Thinner, harder, wearing clothes her father would never wear, standing next to people who radiated danger. But it was him. Same eyes, same scar on his left forearm from a childhood accident he'd told her about. Same wedding ring he still wore despite her mother being gone. Yeah, Olivia whispered, confusion and fear mixing into something nauseating. That's him. Why do you have a picture of my dad? How do you? Reaper's face transformed, winter eyes turning to ice. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the warehouse feel smaller, the walls pressing in. Your father's not a truck driver, kid. He showed her another photo, her father in tactical gear, holding weapons, standing with men in uniforms marked DEA. His name's not just Garrett. His code name is Nomad. He's a federal informant embedded in the cartel's distribution network. Has been for 18 months. The warehouse spun. Olivia's knees went weak, and one of the angels caught her elbow before she collapsed. That's impossible, she managed. He drives trucks. He's gone because of work. He's gone because he's gathering evidence against the same cartel that sent Carlos to kill Daniel. Reaper interrupted, not unkindly, but not gently either. He's gone because he's playing the most dangerous game in the world, and he kept you separate to protect you. He swiped to another photo, and Olivia's breath stopped. Her mother, alive, healthy, wearing a visitor's badge for a federal building. The timestamp read 3 weeks before her diagnosis. Your mother wasn't just a civilian, either. She was a congressional aide who discovered financial irregularities linking a senator to cartel operations. That's how your parents met, through the investigation. Reaper's expression softened slightly, and that scared Olivia more than his coldness had. Your mother's leukemia wasn't just bad luck, kid. We think she was poisoned. Slow-acting, untraceable until it was too late. The cartel doesn't leave loose ends. Olivia couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything she'd believed about her life, her family, her mother's death, all of it was collapsing like a building with its foundations removed. Reaper put a hand on her shoulder, heavy but somehow reassuring. We need to find your father before the cartel does. Because if they realize Garrett and Nomad are the same person, if they connect him to you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Olivia understood perfectly. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was leverage. She was bait. She was the key to destroying a man the cartel wanted dead more than anything. Reaper moved to a metal table in the corner of the warehouse and began spreading photographs across its surface like he was laying out evidence at a crime scene. Each image placed with deliberate precision that suggested years of practice building cases, connecting dots that others missed. Olivia followed, her legs moving on autopilot while her brain struggled to process the revelation that her entire life had been a carefully constructed lie, that every bedtime story, every phone call, every promise her father had made was built on a foundation of deception designed to protect her from a truth too dangerous for children. Daniel pushed himself off the wall, ignoring the protests from the angel who'd been patching his wounds with practiced efficiency, and limped over to join them. Each step clearly agony, but his face set with determination that suggested pain was negotiable when answers mattered. The photos formed a timeline of deception. Surveillance images capturing moments Olivia's father had never mentioned, places he'd supposedly never been according to the stories he told over crackling phone lines. People he'd supposedly never met, but stood beside with easy familiarity that spoke of repeated contact. Each image felt like a betrayal, another crack in the foundation of everything she'd thought was real, another piece of her childhood innocence crumbling like old paper exposed to flame. Your father's code name is Nomad because he moves constantly, Reaper began, his finger tracing routes across a map someone had tacked to the wall with red pins marking cities from Vancouver to Tijuana, a web of connections that looked more like a spider's trap than random travel routes. 18 months ago, the DEA recruited him after a cartel shipment he was legitimately transporting got intercepted at a way station outside Sacramento. They found 200 kilos of cocaine hidden in furniture he thought was legit cargo. Reaper pulled out a photo showing Olivia's father in a diner booth across from 2 men in suits whose faces radiated authority and government service. They offered him a choice: prison for unknowing involvement, even though he was clean, or cooperation. They told him the minimum sentence would be 15 years, that you'd be an adult before he saw you again, that your mother would be a widow in everything but name. The words hit Olivia like physical blows, each one rewriting history she thought she understood. He chose his family, chose to stay free for you and your mother. But the work they asked him to do, it wasn't just driving routes and reporting shipments. Reaper's expression darkened, and he pulled out more photos. Her father in warehouse districts, truck yards, meeting with men whose faces had been circled in red marker, identified as cartel operatives and handwritten notes along the margins. They embedded him deep, made him a logistics coordinator for the cartel's West Coast distribution network. Real access, real responsibility, real danger. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was participating, making decisions that moved product, coordinating deliveries that made the cartel millions. Olivia stared at the photos, trying to reconcile the man who'd taught her to ride a bike in the park, who'd made her pancakes shaped like bears, who'd cried at her mother's funeral like his heart was being torn out, with the man who apparently moved drugs for criminals, who shook hands with murderers, who lived a double life so convincing that even his own daughter never suspected. He was gathering coordinates, delivery schedules, supplier contacts, financial routing numbers, encryption codes, building a case that would dismantle the entire operation from Seattle to San Diego, arrest hundreds of people, seize billions in assets. Reaper's voice carried grudging respect. Your father's intel has already led to 47 arrests, 3 major seizures, and the dismantling of a money laundering operation running through legitimate businesses in 6 states. Another photo landed on the table, her father standing beside a man in a Hell's Angels cut, both partially obscured by baseball caps and photographed from distance with the grainy quality of telephoto surveillance. Their body language suggested conversation, collaboration, shared purpose. Olivia looked closer at the second man, her breath catching when recognition hit. The angel standing with her father was Daniel. You knew him? She asked, turning to Daniel, voice rising with confusion and something that felt dangerously close to anger. You've been working with my dad this whole time. Daniel nodded carefully, his swollen face making even that small gesture look painful, the bruises already deepening to purple and black that would take weeks to fade. Not directly. We've never actually met in person, never shaken hands, or spoken face-to-face. Everything was digital. Encrypted channels using military-grade algorithms, dead drops and locations randomized by software, anonymous file sharing through networks layered with so much protection even the NSA would have trouble tracing the source. He pointed to the timestamp on the photo with a finger that trembled slightly. That picture was taken by cartel surveillance 14 months ago. They suspected someone was feeding information out, bleeding their operation, but they couldn't figure out who. Your father and I were parallel operatives, him on the logistics side feeding movement data, me embedded in the angels watching for cartel partnerships that could spread their poison into communities already struggling with addiction and violence. Olivia's mind reeled, trying to fit this new information into a worldview that kept shattering and reforming into patterns she didn't recognize. But the Hell's Angels, you're part of them. You were the patch. You ride with them. How are you also? The contradiction seemed impossible, like being told someone was simultaneously police and criminal, hero and villain. Daniel cut her off gently, his ruined voice somehow patient despite the pain each word must have cost. The angels aren't what people think. We're not saints. I won't lie to you about that. We've broken laws, hurt people who deserved it, and some who probably didn't, operated in gray areas where right and wrong get complicated. But we're not the cartel either. We don't poison communities. We don't target civilians. We have lines we don't cross. His jaw tightened, visible even through the swelling. When they came to us 3 months ago proposing a partnership, most of the chapter wanted to take it. Big money, guaranteed protection from rival clubs, expansion opportunities in a territory we'd been eyeing for years. The vote was supposed to be unanimous, a show of unity. I voted no because I'd seen laboratory analysis of what their product does to human bodies. I'd watched kids OD on fentanyl-laced doses that stopped their hearts in minutes. Watched families destroyed when fathers chose addiction over rent money. Watched neighborhoods turn into war zones over corner sales. His voice dropped lower, carrying weight that spoke of personal experience, of losses that haunted him in quiet moments. The cartel doesn't forget votes like that. They needed me gone, needed to remove the dissenting voice before I convinced others to reconsider. And they needed it to look justified so the chapter wouldn't seek revenge. So they framed me for stealing their money. $500,000 that I supposedly skimmed during preliminary negotiations. They planted evidence in my accounts, forged digital trails, made it look airtight. Daniel's one functioning I met Olivia's. Then they sent Carlos and Marcus to execute me in an alley, and planned to tell my brothers I was a thief who deserved what he got. The angels would have accepted it, mourned me briefly, and moved on. The partnership would have proceeded without opposition. Clean, simple, effective. He paused. Until you threw that baseball and changed everything. Reaper laid down another photograph, and Olivia's breath caught in her throat so sharply it felt like choking. Her mother, alive and vibrant and beautiful in ways Olivia had almost forgotten during the months of hospital visits and deterioration, sitting in what looked like a federal building conference room with documents spread before her like treasures. Her mother wore professional clothes and an expression of fierce concentration Olivia recognized from homework sessions and parent-teacher conferences. Your mother worked for Senator Travis as a congressional aide, Reaper explained, his tone shifting to something almost reverent, the way people spoke about the dead when they'd earned respect. But she wasn't just filing papers and scheduling meetings and answering constituent phone calls. She had access to campaign finance records, donor lists, spending reports, internal communications. And she noticed irregularities. Large donations from shell corporations with names like Pacific Consulting Group and Western Development LLC that traced back through layers of obfuscation to cartel-front businesses operating out of strip malls and industrial parks. He produced another photo showing financial spreadsheets covered in highlighted sections, handwritten notes and margins, calculations that meant nothing to Olivia but clearly meant everything to the investigation. She was building a parallel case, documentation that would prove the senator was taking cartel money in exchange for favorable legislation. Border security delays that created gaps in enforcement, reduced DEA funding proposals that hamstrung investigations, judge appointments that benefited their legal defense operations, zoning changes that allowed them to purchase legitimate businesses for money laundering. Reaper's finger traced connections on a chart someone had created linking Senator Travis to 6 different cartel-connected businesses. Your mother was meticulous. Every donation cross-referenced, every meeting logged, every suspicious transaction documented with source materials. She was building something that could survive legal challenges, that could put a sitting senator in federal prison and expose a corruption network reaching into law enforcement, judiciary, even federal agencies. She was going to expose him, Olivia whispered, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity, her mother's late nights and worried expressions suddenly making terrible sense. That's why she died. That's why you think. She couldn't finish the sentence. Saying it made it real, transformed her mother's death from tragic medical accident into calculated murder, from random biological failure into targeted assassination. Reaper's expression was grave, winter eyes holding sympathy but not pity, treating Olivia like someone who could handle truth even when truth was unbearable. 3 weeks before her diagnosis, your mother met with a cartel operative posing as a concerned citizen, bringing her information about community safety issues in his neighborhood. He said he had evidence of police corruption, offered to share documentation if she'd meet him in person. He showed Olivia a grainy security camera photo of her mother shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, his face partially obscured but visible enough to radiate professional charm. We believe that's when she was dosed. Polonium-210 or something similar from Russian laboratories that specialize in untraceable poisons. Radioactive isotope delivered through skin contact, a handshake, a touched doorknob, a document passed between them. It mimics aggressive cancer, kills slowly over weeks or months, leaves minimal trace that medical examiners would recognize as foul play. Reaper's voice gentled slightly. By the time the symptoms appeared, the fatigue, the bruising, the blood count irregularities, the poison was already destroying her bone marrow, shutting down her immune system, making her body attack itself. The doctors diagnosed leukemia because that's what it looked like through every test they ran. They treated her accordingly, but treatment for cancer doesn't work against radiation poisoning disguised as cancer. Olivia's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on a metal folding chair that scraped against concrete with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Her mother hadn't been unlucky. Her mother hadn't lost some cosmic lottery where cells turn malignant for no reason. Her mother had been murdered for caring too much, for trying to do the right thing, for believing that truth mattered more than survival, that justice was worth dying for. The hospital visits, the chemotherapy that never worked, the steady decline, all of it orchestrated by people who killed as casually as others ordered lunch. The cartel sent a message. Reaper continued, voice heavy with something that might have been regret or fury held carefully in check. They showed your father what happens when you dig too deep, when you threaten their money and their power. They killed his wife slowly enough that he could watch every stage, could see exactly what his cooperation had cost, could understand that his choices had consequences that reached beyond himself. The cruelty of it staggered Olivia. Not just murder, but torture, not just elimination, but psychological warfare designed to break the survivor. Daniel added quietly, wincing as he shifted weight off his injured ribs. Your father went dark 3 weeks ago. His last transmission to his DEA handlers was coordinates placing him in Portland, following a shipment he suspected was carrying more than product. The theory is he found evidence, something bigger than distribution routes and supplier networks, something that connects the cartel to legitimate businesses and politicians at the highest levels. Something worth killing for on a scale that makes your mother's death look like a warning shot. Reaper pulled out a USB drive from his pocket, the kind sold at gas stations for $3, completely unremarkable except for the data it contained. He plugged it into a laptop someone had set up on the table, and the screen filled with encrypted files, data streams, communication logs that scrolled past faster than Olivia could read. This is everything Daniel managed to pull before he got burned, before the cartel realized he was feeding information out. Your father's movements over 18 months, his check-in schedules with DEA handlers, his emergency protocols for if things went sideways. Maps appeared showing routes crisscrossing the western United States, thousands of miles marked with timestamps and location codes. Wait, Olivia said, her grief transforming into something sharper, more focused, the fog of shock clearing enough for memory to surface. You said he went dark 3 weeks ago. But my dad called me 5 days ago from Montana. He sounded tired but normal. He told me about truck stops and weather delays and missing me. He said he'd be home soon, that we'd go to that pancake place I like, that everything would be okay. Reaper and Daniel exchanged looks that made Olivia's stomach drop, the kind of glances that passed between people who knew something terrible and were deciding how to break it. Kid, Reaper said carefully, choosing words like he was navigating a minefield. If your father called you 5 days ago, either he broke every security protocol and risked both your lives just to hear your voice. Daniel finished the thought, his ruined voice carrying certainty that allowed no other interpretation. Or someone with access to voice synthesis technology wanted you to believe he was still alive and working normally. AI voice cloning has gotten sophisticated enough that with enough source audio, and your father's left plenty through 18 months of phone calls, they could generate conversations that sound completely authentic. The implication crashed over Olivia like ice water. The call she'd treasured, that had made her feel less alone, that had been her proof that her father still cared despite the distance. It might have been manufactured by the same people who'd killed her mother, a cruelty layered on cruelty designed to maintain illusion while they hunted him. The laptop on the table suddenly chimed with an incoming message, the sound jarring in the heavy silence. One of the younger angels, the one with the scarred eyebrow who'd been monitoring communications, grabbed the computer, his face going pale as bone as he read whatever had just come through. His hands actually shook. "Boss," he said, voice tight with tension that made every person in the warehouse snap to attention. "We just got a hit on Nomad's emergency beacon. It just activated." Every person in the warehouse went rigid, the kind of stillness that preceded violence or revelation, moments where the world held its breath before exhaling chaos. Reaper moved to the laptop with speed that belied his age, covering the distance in 3 strides. "Where?" he demanded, voice sharp as broken glass. The young angel's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up coordinates, cross-referencing locations against city maps, satellite imagery, known cartel properties. When he looked up at Reaper, then at Olivia, his expression carried the weight of very bad news. "It's transmitting from inside the Seattle Police evidence locker. Basement level, restricted access section." Silence crashed through the warehouse like a physical force, heavy enough to crush bone. Daniel broke it first. "That's impossible. The evidence locker is one of the most secure facilities in the city. Multiple checkpoints, digital logs, cameras everywhere, armed guards on rotation. If Nomad's beacon is there, someone with serious access put it there." Or, Reaper's phone buzzed, vibrating against the metal table with a sound like a rattlesnake's warning. He glanced at the screen, and his face turned to stone, all emotion draining away until he looked carved from granite. Marcus just clocked into his shift. Night duty. He's got access to the evidence locker for the next 8 hours with minimal oversight, because skeleton crew works overnight. He looked at Olivia, and for the first time she saw something like fear in those winter eyes, the kind of fear that came from seeing traps before they closed. "This is either a rescue mission or the most obvious trap I've seen in 30 years. And we've got about 20 minutes to decide which one it is before Marcus realizes we're tracking that beacon and moves it or destroys it." Olivia stood up, fists clenched at her sides, grief and fear transforming into determination that surprised even her, burning away uncertainty and leaving only clarity. "That's my father," she said, voice stronger than she felt, channeling her mother's fierceness, her father's courage, everything she'd inherited from people who chose to fight instead of hide. "Trap or not, we're going." Reaper studied her for a long moment. This 10-year-old girl who'd saved one of his brothers with one perfect throw and just learned her entire life was a lie built to protect her from a war she'd been drafted into without consent. Something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or recognition of someone who understood that safety was an illusion and action was the only real choice. Then he nodded once, decisively. "Daniel, you're staying here. You can barely stand, and if we need extraction, someone has to coordinate from outside." Daniel started to protest, pride warring with practical reality, but Reaper cut him off with authority that ended discussion. "That's an order. Your liability in a fight right now, and we need someone here monitoring communications, tracking our movements, calling in backup if this goes sideways." He turned to the other angels scattered throughout the warehouse. "Gear up. Full tactical. Vests, weapons, communications equipment. If this goes sideways, it goes loud, and I want us walking out of there even if we have to go through the entire Seattle PD to do it." The warehouse exploded into organized chaos. Men grabbing weapons from locked cabinets, checking ammunition with practiced efficiency, coordinating through headsets while pulling on Kevlar vests and tactical gear that transformed them from motorcyclists into a small military unit. Reaper pulled Olivia aside while the preparations continued around them like a storm gathering strength. "You understand what you're asking? What you're walking into?" His voice was quiet but intense, making sure she grasped the full weight of the decision. "If your father's really in that evidence locker, he's either captured, injured, or dead. If he's not there and it's bait, then we're walking into a kill box designed specifically to eliminate anyone who comes looking. Either way, people might die tonight. That might include you." Olivia met his eyes without flinching, channeling her mother's conviction, her father's sacrifice, Everything that had brought her to this moment, standing in a warehouse surrounded by outlaws planning to storm a police facility. You said they killed my mother. You said they're hunting my father. You said I'm bait. Her voice steadied, carrying conviction that made her sound older than 10, like she'd aged years in a single night. I'm done being helpless. I'm done hiding while other people fight my battles. Whatever's in that evidence locker, trap or rescue, I'm going to face it. Reaper almost smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that might have become approval if he'd allowed it. Your mother would be proud of you, kid. Terrified out of her mind, but proud. He reached into his vest and pulled out something small and cold, a panic button disguised as a keychain, gray and unremarkable. Things go bad, you press this. Hold it for 2 seconds. We'll know to extract you first, questions later. One of the angels called out that bikes were ready, that the window was closing, that they needed to move now or risk Marcus relocating whatever was broadcasting that beacon. Reaper nodded, then looked one more time at Olivia. Last chance to stay here where it's safe. Olivia shook her head. Nowhere's safe. Not anymore. She picked up the panic button, closed her fist around it like a talisman, and followed Reaper toward the warehouse exit, where 7 motorcycles waited in formation like cavalry preparing to charge. But before they reached the doors, Daniel called out from where he sat monitoring the laptop, his voice urgent enough to stop everyone mid-stride. Wait, the beacon just moved. Every head turned. What? Reaper demanded. Daniel's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up new data, his face going from pale to ash-white. It's not in the evidence locker anymore. It's moving. Fast. Like it's in a vehicle. He looked up, confusion and dread mixing in his expression. Either your father just escaped, or someone just realized we were tracking it and is leading us somewhere else entirely. The signal's heading toward the harbor district. He stopped, eyes widening as recognition hit. Toward the cartel's front business, the shipping warehouse they use for legitimate imports. The trap had just revealed itself, and they had minutes to decide whether to spring it anyway. The harbor district smelled like salt and diesel and something rotting beneath the piers. Olivia pressed herself against the cold metal of the shipping container, her heartbeat so loud she was certain it would give away their position. 3 Hell's Angels flanked her in the shadows. Reaper to her left, 2 others whose names she hadn't learned covering the opposite angle. They'd left their motorcycles 6 blocks back, approaching on foot through a maze of stacked containers and rusted equipment that looked like the skeleton of some industrial beast. The warehouse loomed ahead, a 3-story concrete structure with minimal lighting and security cameras that swept the yard in predictable patterns Daniel had mapped from his remote location. The beacon's signal pulsed steadily from somewhere inside, a digital heartbeat that promised answers or death. This is wrong, whispered the angel to Olivia's right, a man called Trigger whose scarred hands gripped a tactical shotgun with practiced ease. Too quiet. Too easy. Where's their security? Reaper didn't respond, but his expression suggested he shared the concern. Legitimate shipping operations didn't leave warehouses unguarded at midnight, and cartel fronts definitely didn't operate with skeleton crews when millions in product sat vulnerable. The silence felt manufactured, weaponized, like the calm before predators revealed themselves. Daniel's voice crackled through their earpieces, tinny but clear. Thermal imaging shows 8 heat signatures inside. Ground floor, clustered in the northeast corner near where the beacon's transmitting. No movement. They're waiting for something. He paused. Probably waiting for you. Reaper made a hand signal, and the team shifted formation, moving through shadows with coordination that spoke of years working together in situations where mistakes meant funerals. Olivia followed, trying to match their silent movement, feeling absurdly out of place in her jeans and hoodie among men wearing tactical gear worth thousands. They reached a side entrance. A metal door with a simple lock that one of the angels picked in under 15 seconds. Inside, the warehouse opened into vast darkness broken only by emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly green. Rows of shipping containers stretched toward invisible ceilings, creating corridors that could hide armies. The beacon's signal grew stronger, pulling them deeper into the structure like bait drawing fish toward a hook everyone could see but couldn't resist. They found the northeast corner, and Olivia's breath stopped. A chair sat in the center of a cleared space, illuminated by a single overhead work light that created a circle of brightness in the surrounding dark. Sitting in the chair, bound with zip ties and duct tape, was a man who looked like her father but wrong. Thinner, beaten, blood dried across a face that might have been handsome before violence reshaped it. His head hung forward, unconscious or worse, and attached to his chest with clear medical tape was a small electronic device blinking red. The emergency beacon. "Dad," Olivia whispered, starting forward, but Reaper's hand clamped on her shoulder with grip that stopped her like a steel cable. "Wait," he hissed. "Look at the floor." Olivia's eyes adjusted, and horror crawled up her spine. Thin wires, barely visible, crisscrossed the concrete between their position and the chair. Pressure triggers connected to something hidden in the shadows beyond the light. "It's a trap," Trigger breathed. "Classic killbox. We step in there, the whole place comes down." Daniel's voice crackled urgently through the earpiece. "I'm picking up new heat signatures. 12, no, 15 contacts entering the building from the south entrance. You've got incoming. 30 seconds. Reaper cursed, calculating odds that kept getting worse. They couldn't reach Olivia's father without triggering whatever explosives lined the floor. They couldn't retreat without running into whoever was flooding the building behind them. They were pinned exactly where someone wanted them. "Is he alive?" Olivia asked, staring at her father's motionless form. "Can you tell if he's breathing?" One of the angels pulled out binoculars with night vision capability, studying the man in the chair. His face went strange. "Boss," he said slowly. "His chest isn't moving. At all. No respiration, no rise and fall. Either he's dead, or..." The overhead lights suddenly brightened, flooding the space with harsh white light that made everyone squint. A voice echoed through speakers hidden in the rafters, familiar enough to make Olivia's blood turn to ice. "Detective Marcus." "Evening, Reaper. Thanks for coming so quickly. Makes things much simpler." The man in the chair moved. Not breathing, not struggling, but sitting upright with mechanical precision that was utterly wrong. His eyes opened, and they were glass. Cameras. The face Olivia had thought was her father was latex and silicone and technology, a perfect replica containing surveillance equipment and probably worse. "Your father's not here," Marcus's voice continued, carrying amusement that made Olivia want to scream. "He's somewhere much more interesting. But since you were kind enough to bring his daughter to us, I think we can arrange a trade." Olivia for Garrett. Simple exchange. Reaper pulled Olivia backward as the sound of boots on concrete echoed from multiple directions. "Daniel, we need extraction now," he barked into his comm. "Buildings compromised, multiple hostiles, situation is..." The comm unit exploded with static, then went dead. Someone had jammed their communications. They were alone, surrounded, with a 10-year-old girl the enemy wanted badly enough to build this entire elaborate trap. Reaper looked at Olivia, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding whether to fight or surrender, whether her life was worth the lives of his men. Before he could speak, Olivia felt something cold press against her neck from behind. A voice she didn't recognize whispered in her ear, breath hot and rank. "Don't move. Don't scream. You're coming with us." Someone had gotten past their perimeter, had been waiting in the shadows this entire time. Olivia's hand found the panic button in her pocket, but before she could press it, rough hands yanked her backward into darkness, away from Reaper's reaching grasp, away from safety, away from any chance of rescue. The last thing she heard before a cloth covered her face and the world went black was Reaper shouting her name and gunfire erupting like thunder in an enclosed space where bullets ricocheted off metal and concrete, where men died quickly and nobody kept count. Olivia woke to the sound of ocean waves and the smell of motor oil. Her head throbbed where they'd drugged her, and for several disoriented seconds, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then memory crashed back. The warehouse, the trap, being grabbed from behind, Reaper's shout, the gunfire. She forced her eyes open, fighting nausea, and found herself in what looked like a shipping office converted into a holding cell. Bare concrete walls, a single barred window showing darkness outside, and sitting across from her in a metal folding chair was her father. The real one this time. She knew instantly. Not from his face, which was bruised and swollen almost beyond recognition, or his body, which looked like it had lost 30 pounds, but from his eyes. The same eyes that had read her bedtime stories, that had cried at her mother's funeral, that carried guilt and love in equal measure. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice breaking on her name like glass shattering. "Baby girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so damn sorry." She tried to move, but zip ties cut into her wrists, binding her to a pipe running along the wall. Her father was similarly restrained, close enough to see, but impossibly far from reaching. "Dad?" She managed, her throat raw from whatever chemical they'd used to knock her out. "You're alive. You're really." Tears she'd been holding back for months, maybe years, finally broke through. Not just for tonight's terror, but for every lonely dinner, every missed birthday call, every lie he'd told to protect her that had left her feeling abandoned instead. "I thought you'd forgotten about me. I thought the job mattered more than." He cut her off, his voice fierce despite the damage. "Nothing matters more than you. Nothing. Every mile I drove, every risk I took, every second I spent away. It was all to keep you safe, to build a world where you wouldn't have to look over your shoulder wondering if monsters were real." His face crumpled. "Your mother died because I wasn't careful enough, because I thought I could fight them without consequences. I wasn't going to let them take you too." The door opened, and Detective Marcus entered with 2 cartel soldiers flanking him. He looked different without the pretense of civility. Harder, colder, like a mask had been removed to reveal the predator beneath. "Touching reunion," he said, his tone mocking. "Really, I'm moved. Father and daughter together again. Almost makes me feel bad about what happens next." He pulled out a phone, swiped through screens. "Here's how this works. Your father has information the cartel wants, specifically the location of evidence that could put Senator Travis in federal prison and expose our entire West Coast operation. He's been very uncooperative about sharing." Marcus smiled without warmth. "But I'm betting he'll be more cooperative when we start hurting you in front of him. Pain has a way of loosening tongues, especially when it's inflicted on people we love." Olivia's father lunged against his restraints with strength born of desperation, the plastic cutting deep enough to draw blood. "I'll tell you everything. Just let her go. She's 10 years old. She's got nothing to do with this." Marcus shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. She's got everything to do with this. She saved Daniel. She witnessed our operation. She came to the warehouse with the angels. She's in this now, whether you like it or not." He crouched in front of Olivia, studying her face like she was an interesting specimen. "Your mother died because she couldn't mind her own business. Your father's dying because he thought he could play both sides. And you're dying because you inherited their stupid, self-destructive heroism." He stood, pulling out a knife that caught the overhead lighting with cruel efficiency. "We're going to start with fingers. See how many your dad lets us take before he talks." Before Marcus could move closer, the building shook with an explosion that rattled the walls and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Alarms shrieked, red emergency lights flooded the corridors, and automatic sprinklers activated, drenching everything in seconds. Marcus cursed, barking orders into a radio that crackled with panicked voices reporting breaches on multiple floors. The 2 cartel soldiers rushed out, weapons drawn, leaving Marcus alone with his prisoners and his knife. "Your angel friends just signed their death warrants," he snarled, but uncertainty flickered across his face. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. Another explosion, closer this time, sent Marcus stumbling. Gunfire erupted somewhere above them. Not the scattered shots of skirmishes, but sustained firefight that spoke of real battle. Olivia's father saw the distraction and made his move. Despite the zip ties, despite the beating he'd endured, he threw his weight sideways, tipping his chair toward the pipe Olivia was bound to. "When I say go, you run," he told her urgently. "Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just run." Marcus turned back, rage replacing calculation. "You're not going anywhere." He moved toward Olivia's father with the knife raised. But Olivia did something she'd learned from the alley. She acted without thinking. Her baseball sat on a desk near the door where they'd emptied her pockets. In the chaos, with water spraying everywhere and alarms screaming, Marcus had forgotten about it. Olivia's hands were bound, but her legs weren't. She kicked out hard, her foot connecting with the desk, sending the baseball rolling across wet concrete. It bounced once, twice, and landed near her father's outstretched fingers. He grabbed it despite the zip ties cutting deeper, despite Marcus lunging toward him, and threw it with everything he had left. The baseball hit Marcus in the throat with precision that made Olivia's earlier throw look amateur. Marcus dropped, gasping, hands clutching his crushed windpipe. The knife clattered away. The door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by breaching charges. Reaper stormed through with 4 angels behind him, weapons trained, faces grim behind tactical gear. He took in the scene instantly, Olivia and her father bound, Marcus choking on the floor, the evidence of desperate struggle. Clear, Reaper barked. 2 angels moved to secure Marcus, while another cut Olivia's restraints. Her father sagged with relief, so profound it looked like pain. Reaper knelt beside Olivia, checking her for injuries with surprising gentleness. "You okay, kid?" She nodded, rubbing feeling back into her wrists. "How did you find us?" Reaper smiled grimly. "That panic button I gave you started transmitting the second you pressed it. We tracked you here, called in every favor we had. Daniel coordinated with DEA. Turns out your father's handlers have been looking for him for weeks. They're outside now with federal warrants for everyone in this building." Olivia's father was freed, and the moment his restraints came off, he pulled Olivia into an embrace that felt like coming home after years of being lost. He held her like she was the only real thing in a world of ghosts, and she held him back, feeling the sharp edges of his ribs, the trembling in his arms that spoke of trauma that would take years to heal. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "For everything. For the lies, the absence, for dragging you into this nightmare." Olivia pulled back enough to see his face. "Mom would be proud of us," she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "We finished what she started. We didn't let them win." Her father's eyes glistened. "You're so much like her, brave and stupid in equal measure." He managed a broken laugh. "I'm never leaving you again. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Federal agents flooded the building, securing the scene, arresting cartel members who'd survived the assault. Marcus was taken away on a stretcher, already lawyering up, but the evidence Olivia's father had hidden would bury him regardless. Senator Travis would be indicted by morning. The cartel's West Coast operation would collapse within days. As they walked out into the night air that tasted like freedom and salt water, Reaper approached one final time. "Your father's going into witness protection. New names, new city, fresh start." He looked at Olivia. "You saved one of mine. That makes you family, by our rules. You ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call." He handed her a card with a single phone number. The angels take care of their own. 3 months later, Olivia stood on a softball field in a town whose name she was still getting used to, wearing a jersey that didn't quite fit and holding a ball signed by her mother. Her father sat in the bleachers, healthier now, watching every pitch with fierce attention that promised he'd never miss another game. She wound up, remembering her mother's instructions, remembering the alley, remembering that sometimes courage meant throwing before fear could stop you. The ball left her hand in a perfect arc, and the batter swung too late. Strike 3. Her teammates erupted in celebration, but Olivia's eyes found her father's, and the pride there was worth everything they'd survived. That night, tucking her into bed in their small safe house, her father produced something from his jacket. "I found this in evidence storage before we left Seattle." It was a journal in her mother's handwriting, pages filled with notes about the investigation, but also letters, dozens of them addressed to Olivia, written during hospital stays and late nights, meant to be found if the worst happened. The first page read, "My brave girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I need you to know, fighting for what's right is never wrong, even when it costs everything. You come from fighters. From people who don't look away when monsters are real. Make me proud. Feel like you mean it. Olivia traced the words with trembling fingers, feeling her mother's presence like a whisper. Dad, she said quietly, do you think it's really over? The cartel, the danger, all of it. Her father was quiet for a long moment. I think we cut off a head, and now they're scrambling to grow a new one. The evidence we provided will cripple them for years, but organizations like that don't die easy. He brushed hair from her face. But we're safe now. Protected. We get to be boring for a while. Olivia nodded, but something in his tone suggested boring was optimistic. As her father kissed her forehead and turned out the light, Olivia's hand found the card Reaper had given her, hidden beneath her pillow. Outside, a motorcycle engine rumbled past their house, too slow to be coincidence, too deliberate to be random. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sleep tight, kid. We're watching. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Olivia smiled in the darkness, knowing that somewhere out there, 7 men on motorcycles were keeping watch. That family wasn't always blood, that the girl who'd once been invisible had become someone worth protecting. She closed her eyes, her mother's journal pressed against her chest, her father's breathing steady in the next room, and for the first time in months, Olivia felt completely, impossibly safe.